we've heard a little bit about challenges ahead, obviously. The study highlighted some challenges. We've heard today in the proceedings about the challenges of the triple transformation. What's your reaction to those challenges ahead, particularly in the skills and talent area?
Well, I think these challenges have strengthened the challenges, have increased the challenges that we encounter in the skills area. First of all, because we have a demographic aging, and clearly we have a highly educated younger generation, but they are getting smaller, less and less. That means that the efforts have to be focused also and mainly on the working age population. And this is one challenge. The other challenges are the digital and the green. We all know we have gone through COVID. We know what it means. And all of the three now with the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis, all this has increased the challenge. We have 28 sectors, economic sectors, where there are shortages of occupations. Why? Because the companies cannot find people with the right skills. So this is not new. The fact the Spina was mentioning before, the skills agenda in 2020, it was already an issue. And why was it already an issue? Because for the past 20 years, we have been saying precisely that. We need to upskill and reskill our workforce, but very little has happened. And this is why also now we come to the year of skills, because if we want to manage this change together, so ensuring that companies find the people they need with the skills they need, and ensuring that people can match their aspirations, we need to do more. And that is, I think, where the Pact for Skills comes in. It is one of the flagship initiative of the skills agenda, and it was really the key message, and I think the Spina mentioned it before, is joining forces, because companies alone cannot do it. Workers or people in working age cannot do it alone. Public employment services cannot do it alone, and the education and training providers cannot do it alone, because we need to work together. And that is the basic message, and that's why I would really want to congratulate Eurocommerce and Europa for joining forces today. I hope they will be joined by many other companies, social partners, authorities, to really join in sharing the challenge that is ahead of us.
And getting practical about challenges, if I may, very briefly. So, I mean, 2023 is going to be the European Year of Skills. It's a clear demonstration, as we heard also from your other colleague from the Commission, Despina, about focus and about recognition of importance of the sector. But we've also seen figures, 13 million people to train, 1.5 million new people to hire up to 2030, and also the investment challenge that brings. So in the context of numbers like that, what can we expect in terms of future focus from the Commission, particularly in that year of skills next year, to help address those genuine challenges that the sector faces in terms of being able to find the right level of investments, in partnership, of course, in being able to meet those challenging goals of upskilling and reskilling, as we know we need to in Europe?
Yes, I think I should have started by mentioning that we have a target actually in Europe. We would like to have adult, so working age populations up and reskilling every year, 60% of them, to reach 60% of people that upskill or reskill every year by 2030. We are at 37%, so you can measure the challenge. Some member states fare better than others, but overall we have a big challenge. So what are we doing at European level? Well, I think from a policy point of view, as you know, competences at union level are limited in the area of skills and education. Nevertheless, through the skills agenda and initiatives like the Pact or the initiative on individual learning accounts, we are trying to push that change in mindset, because I think we have a lot of training opportunities, but maybe we don't have the right ones. So that's what the Individual Learning Account Initiative tries to achieve, that we have labor market relevant training. And secondly, that by giving a personal budget to the individual, the person feels more incentivized to do training. Another initiative is the one on micro-credentials, where because we need to do this short-term training and upskill ourselves, if I do the effort of training, it's also good that I get it recognized. And that's why a micro-credential can help also for the employer to understand what the person knows and for the person to show what he or she has invested in terms of learning. So this is about policy action, and then the Year of Skills, as we heard, is about really changing this mindset, pushing this initiative. I think we have the tools at European level. It's a matter now of getting down and implementing, and we see the Pact, for instance, we have commitments for training for 6 million workers, so it's immense what can be achieved. And also the idea of the Pact is that the larger companies help also the smaller companies to upskill and reskill because they have bigger means. But also we have funding opportunities. I think this is the first time in the European Union that we have so much funding that can be used for skilling, upskilling and reskilling. And I think Despina Spano, she mentioned the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is one of the 7 priorities is about skills. The other fund is the European Social Fund Plus, where I think it's 100 billion, and a substantial amount of that will go actually to skills. Because as our commissioner, Commissioner Schmidt, my commissioner says, skills means jobs, quality jobs. And that's why it's also very, very important to upskill, and why we would like that the ESF invest even more in upskilling and reskilling. And that's why I think individual learning accounts have been foreseen in these programs, also in their recovery and resilience funds, but also these funds can be used to create, for instance, training centers for small and medium enterprises, for your sector, for instance, to upskill and reskill. So, but these things don't happen at the European level, they happen at the local level. So it's very important that you get together and work out these projects that have to be funded by your authorities.
Okay, thanks, Manuela. Noted. Oliver, I'll turn to you now then. We've heard from Manuela there, obviously, some reaction from the European Commission about the challenges ahead, the initiatives that are there, the focus and investment that they want to put into this. As Manuela said herself, she feels that there's strong European action in that area. We've heard a lot today, and we always hear a lot within the sector about the need for collaboration. Clearly, these challenges that are there are never going to be overcome in isolation, with a sector working on its own, or legislation that doesn't support a sector and enable a sector, and of course the social dimension that Europa obviously brings. From your side, how can social partners on initiatives like Pact for Skills, how can you best work together with the sector to address the challenges that we've heard about?
Well, I mean, as social partners, we work together. As I said before, we have already had several projects with Eurocommerce in how do we deal with lifelong learning, with continuous learning and upskilling. The first point for us is we are in a situation where change is rapid. I mean, 10 years ago, a CEO of a bank said, all the changes in the last 10 years, the same magnitude will happen in the next 5 years. And now, mathematically, it gets faster and faster. So I have a clear doubt that we actually can do it in the old-fashioned way. We just come up with a new model on what a certain job should entail. So I think one of the key points is we need this on the job. In Norway, for instance, we have an example of the social partners, how you can actually integrate it. So you have an incremental approach of training all the time. And that makes it also easier in terms of you can integrate this in the normal working life of people, both on the business side and of the worker side. And you were just mentioning big companies helping smaller ones. I think that is also essential. We need a sectoral approach, because otherwise you get a situation, those companies which make good profits will have good training and others don't because they don't have the money. So we need to have a sectoral approach. That is the second thing. And then the third point, and there the Commission comes in many countries in Europe, we have a capacity problem of the social partners. If you go to Central and Eastern Europe, they actually can't do it. So you only can either do this at company level, or you have to somehow build capacity, and of course there are initiatives as well through the ESF funding in particular. But there also the problem is, if you have a low capacity of the social partners, and it's not only the trade unions, it's employers as well, how can we actually help? Because all those funding is normally based on the national level. So there we need the help of the Commission to actually push national governments to give priority to capacity building of social partners. So that brings it really together. You need to have an on-the-job training approach. You need to do it in the sector, and you actually have to create the institutional setting for actually empowering the social partners on both sides. One key point, and that I was initially also saying, is about respect and perspective. If you're a worker, you don't have a perspective in the job, you're stressed out because changes are happening very rapidly, your salary is not too good, especially now with high inflation, you're worried that you can't feed the family, and then somebody comes to you, sir, and please upskill. And then the only incentive is very often, well, if you don't upskill, you might not have a job. I remember a Dutch employer some years back who basically said, well, we give everybody only 5-year contracts, and if after 5 years they haven't updated their skills, we find somebody else. We already said there, yeah, but I mean in India perhaps, but I mean not necessarily in Europe with the demographic development. So the question for us is, and I think that is important beyond processes, how can we, employers, trade unions together, create an environment that actually is conducive for workers says, yes, I actually want to do the upskilling, and not having a situation that said, okay, now my boss pushes me to do another upskilling and I don't really know why I'm doing it. So that is, I think, one of the stumble stones. It's really the point to make what is in it for a worker. And in it means basically it needs to give you perspective, but it also has to give you the point, okay, it reduces the stress I'm actually having in the job, I'm not running behind, and then a security that actually working conditions and pay as well is good for you. I mean, otherwise I said, okay, in the worst case, the employer thinks about, okay, if I don't deliver, they will sack me, and I find something else, which is more better at the moment for the worker with the labor shortage we have.
Okay, we've had quite a few points from Manuela and now from Oliver as well. Jeroen, Raimund, I'll just open up to both of you at this point for any comments you want to make on what you've already heard.
Yeah, by the way, the 5 years, it wasn't Ahold Delhaize, as you know, your example about the 5-year contract. But I think that if we look at our discussions with social partners, either being the trade unions or, for instance, the Works Council of one of our biggest brands in the Netherlands, Albert Heijn, the Works Council is very active on this topic. And what we see that one of the problems we encounter is that it's rather difficult to get a sense of urgency. Why should you educate yourself? Why should you develop yourself? And we've been discussing this with our social partners. And we think it's very important to answer a few questions. And that's not only about what are my capabilities and which gap do I have to bridge, because that's rather obvious. But it's also a responsibility of employers, for instance, to point out what the developments in the job are, what the developments in the workplace are. And we are sometimes, to be fair, we are sometimes rather reluctant because, you know, being open about that also might raise questions or might get, people, you know, it might create unrest, which you don't want, because what's going to change, what's going to happen. But you have to be open about that in a sensible way. Just to give you one example, we have in Zaandam, near the head office of Albert Heijn, we have a distribution center. And it was a rather old-fashioned distribution center. And at one point in time, we made a business case and we thought ahead and we thought, you know, we have to mechanize this. But once you go that way, you know that you have to inform people that, hey, this is going to happen. And it's going to bring along huge changes for the whole population, for the whole workplace and all the people working there. So what we did is we informed people. Communication is really key. And secondly, we we also were very open about the steps we had to take in order to make people ready for the new world. So what we did, we had assessments, and to make a long story short, in the end, 50 of our colleagues went to the new mechanized distribution center. And very importantly, and I think Oliver also mentioned that, talking about perspective, people should also be very much aware of this, the fact that this is a continuous process, meaning that, you know, in the Netherlands, we now have a shortage of bus drivers. So we also say to people, hey, have you considered the bus driving business? Good idea, they say, but we also say, be aware of the fact that those buses will drive themselves within a couple of years. So it doesn't stop here. And
So
one other
if I can come in, you're
Yeah.
talking here then a little bit about a mentality shift in a way, about trying to get people to really, you're talking about then from the sector side about trying to create a dialogue that helps really create a sense of a culture of lifelong learning.
Yes, quite right. And I think it's a mentality shift for both employers and employees.
Yeah, a two-way shift.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
I think that is really important. If you want to do upskilling, you as a worker need to have the feeling that you're taken seriously. And that's not only about the business interest, it's about your interest as well. So it's really the two things coming together. So I'm always very skeptical if we are talking about, we take some outside provider who somehow has a training program and then you do a training program. There I also see a bit of a problem with what you were talking about, this initiative having these little steps. I mean, how do you really can make it to, and I'm not talking about an IT professional, I'm talking about somebody who works in a warehouse, in a supermarket. How do you explain to him or to her more often, how does this make sense? And I think that is something we can only do together. Because if the trade unions just say this, okay, the trade unions, this is almost class war, but if we say it together as social partners, they get the point. And most workers, all workers, are actually ready to advance. They don't want to just sit there. I mean, they have aspirations as well, but you have to really communicate these aspirations that they say, okay, I'm taken serious, I have a say, I have some authority, sovereignty by myself to move forward.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think from that standpoint, it's also important not to confine the efforts to your own company, because it's a broader challenge we have. And also because of the fact that we found out that there were two key questions we were not quite aware of, to be fair, to be honest. And that is one of them being, what does the labor market look like at all? Because people have no idea. You know, so we have an internal labor market. Mind you, we have 100,000 people working in the Netherlands, so there are jobs inside, yes. But people had no idea of what's going on in the outside world and what are my opportunities there.
I think you raise a key point here. I mean, as well as being a moderator, my background is in communications, and I'm actually a teacher as well. So for me, skills and education are close to my heart, as is communication. And I'll quote here one of your colleagues from some years ago from the Commission. People live their lives at local level, but we're sitting here at a European level, and it's hard to bridge the gap sometimes. So are you saying that, if I've understood correctly, Jeroen, that if we want to be really practical and effective, not only do we need this two-way dialogue, that I think, Oliver, you see as valuable too, but perhaps we also have to recognise the fact that people are living their lives at a local level. I can imagine myself in a workplace. If someone comes to me and says, right, you need to do these things because it's good for you and good for us, it's hard for me to take that on board if I don't share your optic. You've got a big picture of the national, the European level of what's happening. So it seems to me that we almost have a communication obstacle to overcome here. And I've heard from both of you that perhaps the best way to overcome that is in really strong collaboration.
Yes.
But my question is that employer and union collaboration, is that actually the level of collaboration that we actively have day to day at the moment?
Of course, I would say. You disagree if you want.
Please go
Well,
ahead.
I would say totally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a deal. You join a company, you become a member, and you look what's in for you. And each company has to make sure that there is enough in for you, otherwise you'd leave. I mean, the demographic change or transition you mentioned, I think it was a great point. The employees are on the stronger side, more and more. So I think companies are really aware of this effect. There may be companies who don't care, but those will find really hard to find their employees who stick to them and will have to fight high attrition rates.
Okay, noted. No, Manuela, I noticed that one or two occasions when our speakers were speaking, I could see that perhaps there was a point you wanted to raise, so please do.
Yes, because I think, indeed, I very much agree that we need to have a mind shift, but not just at company level. I think we also need, and that's why the year of skills comes in handy, because I think most of adults, when you interview them, they say, is skilling important? They will say to 90% yes. Is training something for you? Then it drops immediately. Because there is not, normally highly skilled people upskill and reskill quite naturally, I would say, but not at low and medium skilled level. And that's why that we need to somehow overcome the stigma.
And what do you think? What do you think is the reason why?
Because there is still this concept that you go to school, you do your initial education, and that's it. And I think that upskilling and reskilling is for the weak or the low skilled or the low qualified. That's the vision that is predominant.
And
that's what we need to change, that skills are good for everyone, whether you are an IT specialist or just a worker in
So it comes
in a
back
company.
again a little to what Jeroen was alluding to. I think also it's really then the mind shift has to be really about creating this sense truly of a culture of lifelong learning, which I've understood from you, you feel we don't have yet.
We don't have yet, because we had a target for lifelong learning for the last 20 years, and it moved from, the target was 15%, it moved from 9 to 11%. Clearly, we are not there.
Yeah.
But perhaps I may add to that, at least within Ahold Delhaize, we are quite convinced that this applies to everyone. From the doorman, should we have one, to the board of directors, no doubt about that. But when it comes to the mind shift, there's also something that has to change in the collective mind shift, I think, and that's that's our perspective on security, because I think we should be much more aware of work security rather than job security, because we tend to cling on to our jobs, but if you are well educated, if you are well equipped, then you have a fair chance on the labor market, and that's in a psychological sense a very important aspect of security. Adding to that, if you allow me, from a more, how should I put it, humanistic view, we are retailers. We can only operate in stable and fair societies. I think that's key as well, so it's about the individual, but it's also about the individual in a society where we can make a fair living, and of course spend your money at Albert Heijn or wherever.
That's true. That's true. And our face to the customers are the people in the stores.
Definitely.
If we don't treat them fairly and good,
Exactly.
we wouldn't have success.
But I think, and I was responsible for the finance sector many years back, and there was our slogan was, we as bank employees want to have the right to give customers good advice, and not just basically having an exercise in how can we make the most money. And I think that is one of the problems where there was over decades a bit this policy, let's make the most profit and get as quickly on there as we can get. And then on both sides of the customers, as well as of the workers, there was a feeling, okay, what I'm really doing, and the quality doesn't really count as long as a quantity is there. And I think when I look at the finance sector, the result was basically people went to the internet banks and said, I don't get a service anyway when I go to my branch, so I go for the cheapest. And I think that is a danger in retail as well. If you have Amazon and other coming in and you are going through the internet, if you in a shop don't really provide this extra quality, why should I go there? And I think our experience in the finance sector, and I'm sure in the retail it's the same, the workers in the supermarkets, they actually want to do a good job and have happy clients and not just say, okay, here is the bag of whatever and leave me. And I think that is really also part of this environment. You have to be, as in the old times, if you were working there, you were definitely proud for your job. And how do we actually go to the point? Because if you're proud and say, it makes sense to me, then you just say, actually, I want to keep the job and not have the feeling, okay, I don't do much, you will sack me if you feel anyway, so why should I actually move forward? I mean, just really dystopian. And I think there, really as social partners, we have to change it. And it's really the mentality, when I say looking at the bosses on the employers, how basically can you communicate that it's actually worthwhile that you're doing it, because it brings you further, and it's not just something, oh yeah, you need some more qualities, otherwise you don't get anywhere. I mean, it has to be a positive story in that regard.
That's true.
I think that's something everybody would agree on. Jeroen, I'm going to come back to you, picking up on this culture of lifelong learning approach. You mentioned already the communication part, that two-way mindset shift. Do you see any other bottlenecks or potential barriers to promoting this culture of lifelong learning? And if so, how do you suggest we could practically overcome them?
Yeah, I think many things have already been said. But just to give you another example from a more instrumental point of view, that's, for instance, that in the Netherlands we have this personal training budget, which we agreed upon with the trade unions. And to be fair, there are not. I think way more people should make use of that. So that's one thing. But we discussed this sense of urgency. But for instance, if you go to another company to which the CLA does not apply, you can't take it with you because of fiscal reasons, and that's I can't get my head around it. These are simple things we should change. Secondly, another challenge is that we really do need to cooperate more and more over company levels, because you already said it, you can't do it as a company alone, no matter how big you are. Because to give you an example, we now need engineers for solar systems. People in our warehouses can be trained to become such an engineer, but in order to reach that, to make that real, you have to cooperate.
You've touched upon there a little the issue of high-skilled employees as well. And Raimund, I'll bring that to you. I mean, one challenge that I see for retail and wholesale is in attracting those high-skilled employees as well, not at the exclusion of, but parallel to the other upskilling challenges that we have. For example, data scientists or others. What do you think's needed to help us do that effectively, to attract also the high-skilled workers?
I totally agree. I think we have to be good at both ends. So bring in the right people from the beginning and also attract high-quality talents. I read in this study actually from McKinsey that digital leaders generated 3.3 times more total revenues than latecomers in the digital market. So I would like to aim high and say we have to build an atmosphere, to create an atmosphere where we really attract the best scientists in the world to come to Europe. And then we have to create a culture where young people can really catch up, because we need the best scientists, I think, in digital
and
culture.
within that, if I can say as well, I mean, I look at it from an educator's point of view myself as a teacher. Not only are you in competition to make sure that you get the skills you need with other areas of the world, but I would argue also you're in competition with every other sector in Europe as well for those high-skilled employees in the future.
Yeah, that's true.
So looking at it from that perspective, do you have any recommendations for the sector from your experience of perhaps, and also whether the institutions or European institutions or governments can help too? How can we make sure that for retail and wholesale that we make sure that we do get the level of people with the right skills we need across the workforce?
Yeah, to some extent maybe in retail we have a reputation problem, because maybe high talents don't aim for retail at first. And one way we tried, and it's actually we started this year, is I started an executive master in retail management at the Bocconi University, and Bocconi is ranked as the 13th best university worldwide. And no executive master in retail management exists already in the world, as far as I know, because we are still struggling to find the title we award at the end of the program. But it's a master degree at the Bocconi University, and the first start is it's inside with Spar. We have 20 employees working together, and it's fantastic. But I think if we do it more, if more companies maybe here in the room join us and we start such programs, we really set a sign that retail is an attractive, very inventing, very progressive, very rapid business. Yeah.
Please, Oliver.
I think that is one of the issues where we in retail, but also in services, have a disadvantage, because it's still the feeling when you work for industry, it's just really on the forefront of where things are happening. Or if you do work in public service, it's public service, you do something for society, and services is a bit okay, and then they do basically the rest and form the basis.
That's true.
And the Commission is partly doing this as well. I mean, you know, we have now the what is it called? So having the economic sovereignty or so, and that doesn't really look in retail or on the services side, but looks more on the industry side. And I think there also we have to, retail is the biggest part of services, and services is the biggest part of the economy. So in that sense, I mean, we also have to really bring this in, that if you really make a difference, you actually have to look at services and in retail, because if you only do it in industry, there will be more robotics in there anyway, so you won't have too many jobs. And then the question is, who are actually the people who pay your taxes and go around? So I think that is one of the key points we really have to think of. It's about creating this image that we are really at the forefront. And I think in the McKinsey report, and Crystal was mentioning it, if you look at just transition, you know, I mean, most people buy in shops, and when you go down the supply chain, I mean, most of the stuff where you actually can make a difference and twist could be actually in commerce, in retail, because you are at the peak of the supply chain. So there are possibilities, and I think more you than us, but I mean, I think that is something we have to bring about.
Great.
Yeah, so a practical question, Raimund, then, just to bring together that idea of attracting high-skilled employees. You gave the example there of Bocconi University in Milan. I know it well. I used to live in Milan. And how many other such master's programs or similar are you aware of within the sector? Is this a groundbreaking one, or are there others?
I hope it's the first one in the world. Because I planned 10 years for it, but
Yeah.
you need some money from the owners, but they granted it and we started it, yeah.
Yeah. So you see scope for many other people to do similar
I
things?
would hope so. I
Yeah.
would hope so.
Very
Yeah.
much so, okay.
Yeah.
And I'll stay with you, Raimund. I want to switch the focus a little towards SMEs. I mean, it's an obvious thing with such an enormous amount of SMEs representing a large bulk of the sector. The study identified some real challenges for SMEs in promoting up and reskilling. The obvious ones about opportunity, about accessibility of funding, about resources, financially but also administratively, and all of those elements. What's being done, and what do you think could be done more in that area?
Today, during my breakfast, I called a friend of mine. He worked in the buying department. He studied economics. And then he left our company to become one of our independent retailers. He has now 2 stores. And I told him, you're the lucky one, because he has 50 employees, so he belongs to the 8% in the study, with more than 10 or more than 10 employees already. And I asked him, because he really, it's his daily life. And of course, sometimes they're really down to earth. It's not easy for people to find their way, so to work. They are not it's not easy really, they're reluctant to some extent for training, because maybe we have a culture in our society where learning new stuff is not always on story of success, and each of us maybe has at least one memory. Another part is, I think, what we really could do actually, and what we do in Austria. I'm a fan of vocational educational training. I mean, we have a school in Austria, and this school was founded in 1906 by a former retailer. And his problem was in 1906, he said, it's so tough to find, the right people that are really have the right skills. So the problem is not new, it's a long story. And we have this school, and we have 370 pupils there each year in Vienna. And vocational educational training, I think, is so great, because it really gives people the chance to use their hands, to use their social skills, and to use and to learn other things, and of course school stuff, but it's combined, and they know what it's for, because sometimes I think it's hard for people. We spoke about it today already, if you have a career in school and then you study, takes so long till you really can show what you can and what you can perform and what you could do for others.
Yeah.
And I think that's an answer we should find in our society.
So do you think a stronger focus then on, for example, vocational schools like that would be an incredibly powerful tool to help not only SMEs but others too?
Yeah, and with another colleague of you, we spoke about online training. I think it's also a huge chance actually to bring in other people, because it's shame you don't have to be ashamed. If you make an error, the computer won't blame you. So I love that. It maybe is a good chance, especially for people who don't want to go into a classroom and to stand in front of other pupils.
So to raise accessibility of training, I'd argue, I suppose, in terms then of approach and mindset, but also possibly in geographical terms as well, to make it more accessible for people too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay, noted. Manuela, I'll come back to you on that SME perspective again. I mean, the study that we saw earlier today did note, as I mentioned to Raimund, some challenges for SMEs, particularly in terms of promoting up and reskilling. And frankly, the uptake of co-financing is a little limited. The EU funds are there. But I raised the point earlier, based on a few questions we heard from our audience too, that for multiple reasons, which I think are quite clear to you too, I hope, SMEs do have challenges in the retail and wholesale sector in accessing the funds that are actually there. Mm-hmm. So from a practical level, very much with a practical focus, what's the Commission doing about this? How aware are you of this issue? And what are you practically doing to try and make sure also that other associations, for example, at the local level, that are working to support SMEs, how can you help those? And how are you helping those?
Okay, your question is very much on the practical side. Well, I think, first of all, if we speak about the European Social Fund, the authorities that manage these are at national or regional level. So this is really at the bottom level. And there they are managed by committees. They are called monitoring committees. And there you have the social partners. And I think that's very important that your colleagues there really engage and make sure that the calls for projects address your needs, because that it is what it is about. And you were mentioning before the capacity of social partners in a certain country. The ESF Plus funds also the capacity building of social partners. And as Commissioner, we paid particular attention that there is an amount in all the member states, so that social partners, even in those where there are strong tradition, but also where there is not such a strong tradition, there is funding for building up that capacity. So my call to you is really use it, because it will help us also in directing and in shaping the funding that you will want to do. Then you mentioned before vocational education and training. We also agree. But vocational education and training, as you said, there is a problem of attractiveness, no? Because I think it's perhaps much more bling to do the higher education studies, although vocational education is also at a higher academic level. So we have been focusing very much at European level with vocational skills weeks, which actually is ongoing until the end of the year, to really put the focus on vocational education and training. We have an alliance of apprenticeships to really push for more apprenticeships, because these are practical ways of learning on the job, and that really helps. Right. And the other element, just one more element, is that we are also funding centers of vocational excellence. And there it's also about actors together, because I understand it might be difficult for a small company to engage in a project, to submit a project, but if you do it together with your partners locally and set forward this project, then it's easier. And these projects on centers of vocational excellence, we have now many across Europe, and I see that there are nations across the world that are now copying this European model, because it brings together actors at national level to focus on an issue on vocational education and training and try to get better, and then link them up with other areas in Europe. And that creates also a push towards upwards.
Okay.
just 2 points: no dead end, and no glass ceilings. I think these are important. So, vocational training can be an option, and then you could go on, of course, and you could still decide to go to university. So, we should make it easy for people to switch or to find another crossroad and to go left or right. So, I think that's important.
If I may, it's indeed important, and in fact we have changed a little bit the policy framework at European level together with member states. Precisely in vocational education and training, precisely one of these elements is the one of modularity, so that you can add to your learning throughout your life or in your initial training, and that there is more, you can move from higher education to higher vocational education, from vet education to master level and so on in vocational education or in higher education, so that there is possibility, permeability in the different education and training systems for people to evolve, so that vocational education is not seen as a second choice. It's a choice.
And we have a school with 18 high school students doing now their vocational educational training within 2 years. So I think really we should offer different choices. And what I would love to see as my kids attend a school, more schools where you can do both. You have a high school diploma and you have the chance to do your vocational educational training. I think it's fantastic for young people to experience both possibilities when they're young.
Yeah, it's about ensuring our educational models are properly future-proofed, really, isn't it? And producing what we need now and in the future. Audience, we're at that stage of the day now where lunch is digesting deep. We're nearly there. We've got about 20 minutes left, I'm aware. Have we got any questions sitting here that you particularly want to raise to our panel about what we've heard? We've heard a lot of suggestions about the way forward in implementing something like the Pact for Skills. We've talked a little bit about some of the barriers and some of the challenges. Any particular questions in the audience at this stage? Okay, I'll take that as an invitation to move forward. So with that in mind, let's wrap up then. I'll give the floor to each of you in turn. I'll go Oliver, Jeroen, Raimund, and then Manuela. And my question to you is, on this issue of implementing the Pact for Skills and making sure that we have the right focus on skills and talent we need in the sector moving forward, and moving forward in partnership as well, what are the key takeaways for you? So first, Oliver, to you.
Well, let's say there are really 3 takeaways. And my first one is really organizing a climate for training, which is really respect and perspective. I mean, you're taking the people seriously, and they felt taken seriously. The second point is you have to have the right combination between vocational training before and continuous training as close as possible to the workplace, because there you can integrate it. And the third point is you can't do this by company. You actually need this at sector level, and then probably also with a perspective beyond the respective sector. I think these are the 3 key points. One last point to make, what always surprises me, in several countries or regions, we have vocational training holidays. So you can take every year so many days, but the pickup is not great. So I think there's also an issue, again, for employers and for trade unions. Why aren't they picked up? Is it a reason they don't want to do it, or is it perhaps they don't have the time? Because an employer says, well, actually, you're away 5 days. That doesn't really work. So how can we actually make sure that there's also within the work, there is basically the space to do the training, and it's not some extracurricular activity.
Okay, noted. Jeroen, over to you.
Yeah, well, I think many important things have been said. 2 things come to my mind, and that's the importance of, I think it was already mentioned by Oliver, that the importance of cooperation beyond the limits of your own organization, that's really key, otherwise it won't fly, so that's one thing. The other thing, and that's I think even more important, is that also the mind shift we discussed when it comes to lifelong learning and responsibilities, because yes, it is a mutual responsibility of both employees and employers, and if that does not change, we won't be successful. So I think that's key.
That's key. Okay, thank you. And Raimund?
What I love about the Pact for Skills is that's something initiated on an international level, on the EU level, and actually I think we have to be more flexible concerning our workforce. We may have to make it much easier for people to move from one country to the next. You would assume it's easy within the European Union, but it's not. I make the point also, people warn me it's not, but I do it. I have an employee in my team. I live near the border to Germany, and she lives 30 kilometers from Austria, far away. And she's not allowed to do 1 day at home, to work at home. Home office is not allowed because to legal regulamentors. Yeah. And that's very, so I think we still have to do and to find good ways in order to make it easy for people within Europe. And Pact for Skills, I think, is a great chance to come together, to learn from each other, from all people that are involved. I love that.
Okay, thanks very much. And Manuela, I'll leave the last word to you.
Well, first of all, I think it was an important moment today, no, that you launched this partnership. I think, as was said, it's the beginning. And because it really encapsulates what the Pact is about. It's about joining forces. It's for social partners, company, public authorities to join in and to make this partnership really fruitful. But perhaps the message that I can bring is that we are there to help. Please, we are here. My colleague who will take the floor now for Cuba, we are there to help you and to assist you with how we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Could we give our panel a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen?